let's get right to today's topic. But when Cephas was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. Galatians 2:11. This passage is often cited by those in the Recognize and Resist movement as an attempt to debunk sedevacantism. We hear the old "Paul resisted Peter" line as if it were some self-delegation by which one could simply refuse submission to the Roman pontiff when he simply sees fit. Why, if Paul can resist Peter to his face, then why can't we simply resist Francis and his predecessors when it comes to matters of church discipline, governance, and faith? First, it's important to understand what is actually going on in Galatians 2:11. While in Antioch, Peter was eating with Gentile converts until Jewish converts arrived. Upon their arrival, Peter got up from his place with the Gentiles and sat with the Jewish converts exclusively, who were still following the dietary laws of Moses. In doing so, one might have been led to believe that in order to be a follower of Peter, he would have to follow the law of Moses. Paul therefore rebuked Peter's actions, and this imprudent act was corrected. In their book Moral Theology, Volume 1, Reverends John A. McHugh and Charles J. Callan teach that, quote, until the gospel had been sufficiently promulgated, that is, until the destruction of the city and the temple of Jerusalem, the ceremonial law was permitted to Jewish converts, not as prefiguring Christ, but as a form of divine worship. End quote. Never did Peter teach doctrinal error. Never did Peter preach heresy. Never did Peter blaspheme. Never did Peter lead souls astray. Bishop Richard Shalloner writes on the issue, quote, the fault that is here noted in the conduct of St. Peter was only a certain imprudence in withdrawing himself from the table of the Gentiles for fear of giving offense to the Jewish converts. But this, in such circumstances, when his doing so might be of ill consequence to the Gentiles, who might be induced thereby to think themselves obliged to conform to the Jewish way of living, to the prejudice of their Christian liberty. End quote. Never did Paul resist Peter's authority. Never did Paul reject Peter's commands. Never did Paul separate himself from Peter so that he may follow tradition. What we as Catholics do know is that we must subject ourselves to the commands of the Roman Pontiff. As Pope Pius IX taught in Pastor Aeternus, quote, all the faithful of Christ must believe that the Apostolic See and the Roman Pontiff hold primacy over the whole world, and that the Pontiff of Rome himself is the successor of the Blessed Peter, the chief of the apostles, and is the true vicar of Christ and head of the whole church and faith and teacher of all Christians, and that to him was handed down in Blessed Peter by our Lord Jesus Christ full power to feed, to rule, and guide the universal church, just as it is also contained in the records of the ecumenical councils and in the sacred canons. This is the doctrine of Catholic truth, from which no one can deviate and keep his faith in salvation." End quote. You're listening to Monday Mornings with Matt and Kevin on the Catholic Family Podcast.
Like what you hear? Be sure to subscribe to the Catholic Family Podcast.